All right. So I have to see what time it is when we're starting to know how much time we have.
10:35.
Okay, we got time. So this one is actually a bonus to Pesach to our Torah also, so you can sort of store it away and use it. Because Parshas Bo gets us into gear for real Pesach as opposed to Shmos and Va'era, which were, all the setup, the experience in Mitzrayim. With Bo, we're actually getting out of Mitzrayim. We get the rules of the Korban Pesach, the bringing of the Korban Pesach, and all that surrounds it. And one thing that people don't realize is that there's a great debate in halacha about whether we should be bringing the Korban Pesach nowadays, like without a Beis Hamikdash. We don't have one without Nevi'im and so on. There was a rabbi in the 19th century, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer. He was born in Germany, studied under some very big names from the time, Rabbi Yaakov of Lisa, Rabbi Kiva Eger, and he argued, in general, he was extremely pro-initiative in terms of Zionism, like in that camp that said, let's buy land from the Ottomans and set up communities in Israel. But he also argued that the Beis Hamikdash could be rebuilt, and Karbanos could be brought, and he had solutions for all of the various halachic problems. Like, where exactly on the Temple Mount do you build the Beis HaMikdash? What's the site for the Mizbeach? We don't have clothing for the Kohanim, the Big Day Kahuna. We don't have a Para Duma to be able to purify people. We don't have Kohanim who can certify their lineage going all the way back. Like, he had an answer for everything. And he wrote about this, and all of the great figures of his time addressed this, mostly in the negative, saying that it doesn't work. He had a paper called Drishat Zion that he put out and laid out his arguments there, including the argument for bringing the Korban Pesach today. And one of the classic arguments against bringing the Korban Pesach is that people are tamei, people are impure. But in truth, the Gemara discusses that and puts forth the idea of tuma hutra b'tzibur, meaning that you can bring a communal korban even if people are tamei, because tuma is hutter, it is mutar, it is permitted. Don't worry about it, in other words. If you take a look at the first source on your sheet, I just brought you a short quote where he talks about this, and he says, Minia Hashenis, he says the second obstacle, the second objection to bringing the Korban Pesach today is that people are tamei. I don't like the word impure. I use the word tamei rather than impure, because impure is not really a translation of tamei. Tamei doesn't have an English translation. It refers to a state of ineligibility, ritual ineligibility. When a person is tamei, they're not able to go into the Beis Hamikdash, they're not able to eat from karbanos or certain truma and meiser and that sort of thing. But it doesn't have an English term. So I'm just going to say tamei and tuma, and the opposite is tahara. That's not going to really be the focus today anyway, so we're not going to use it that much, but it's in this initial source. He says the second obstacle is tumas makes. People were in contact with the dead, and they didn't have the means of becoming tahor. And he says, don't worry about it, because the Gemara already rules that tuma is permitted for communal karbanos, for korban tzibur. And then he says to you, reading my translation, he says, granted that the Rambam rules with the view that tuma is only dichuya, it's only pushed off for communal karbanos, meaning that therefore you have to look for a way to bring the karban in at tahara. Right? Let me take a step back on that, because it's worth explaining what this is about, because it's something that does intersect with people's lives in certain situations. There are two ways to say that something that should have been prohibited is actually permitted. One is called hutra, and the other is called dichuya. Hutra, like the word mutar, means permitted. Dichuya means pushed off. The difference between them becomes very clear in the following scenario. We know that you override Shabbos to save someone's life, right? That's a given, that's understood. Hopefully people are very familiar with that. They're not having to practice it necessarily, but in general people should know that. However, we say that pikuach nefesh, while it overrides Shabbos, renders Shabbos dichuya and not hutra. Shabbos is pushed off, But it's not that everything is permitted. Practical application. Somebody knows before Shabbos that they are likely to need to violate Shabbos for the sake of somebody else. So let's say a woman knows that she's reaching the end of term and expects that, in fact, she could need to go to the hospital on Shabbos. Or you have somebody who, well, no, let me stick with that case. So the question then becomes, is there any obligation for her to try to arrange to have someone who isn't Jewish on call, who would be able to take her to the hospital, as opposed to Shabbos morning saying, we got to go, I'm going to jump in my car, my husband's going to drive me, however it's going to work, but we're going to actually do this ourselves. Since you can anticipate it, do you have an obligation to act in advance and prevent it? If you say Shabbos is hutra, that everything is permitted, the answer is no. It's just as fine for me to drive there Shabbos morning as it is for me to drive there on Friday. Why should I make any arrangements? If you say dechuya, it's only pushed off, that means that you do the minimum you need to do. Obviously, you take care of everything. You don't want to endanger someone's life. But on the other hand, if you have a way to reduce the problem, then reduce it. That's dechuya. So, and that's the halacha. The Shabbos is in fact dechuya for pikuach nefesh. If there is a way to reduce what one is doing, then, again, while preserving safety and so on, then you do it. So it's here, Kalisher says, the Gemara does say that Tumah is only pushed off, dichuya, for a communal korban. And therefore you have to try to do it in a way that's tahor. Nonetheless, if everybody's tamei meis, like today, then you bring the korban. That's the way you're going to bring the korban. And so his argument is that you could bring the Korban Pesach bismanenu, in our day. I'm not going through the whole in and out of bringing Korban Pesach today. It's a fun discussion, but it's a little drier than what we usually get into in a Parsha Shir. So I'm going to leave that by the wayside for now. The reason I bring this, other than it being an interesting thought question, what would that look like if not just one small group of people decided that they wanted to go up the mountain on 14th of Nisan and bring the Korban, but actually if you had like thousands of people trying to do that. I bring it because in the course of his essay on this, Rabbi Kalisher uses a term for the Korban Pesach. He calls it Korban Tzibur, a communal Korban. There are two types of Korbanos. There are private Korbanos, and then there are communal Korbanos. Right? Example of a personal korban, somebody did something wrong and now needs to atone for it, and they bring a korban chatas. They bring a sin offering. So that is obviously personal. It's something that they bring. There is no communal role in it at all. It's just for them. Example of a communal korban, a korban sibur, like he mentions the korban tamid. Every morning, every evening in the Beis HaMikdash, you have a korban that is brought on behalf of the community. It's paid for out of the community's half-shekel donations that everybody gives. That's a communal korban. How would you classify the Korban Pesach? He calls it a communal korban in the context of saying communal korbanos override tumah. But how would you...
Each family eat it on their own?
Each family eats it on their own. That makes it a private korban. So why does he call it communal?
Because everybody does it?
Because everybody does it. So we're all doing this together, even as we're doing this as individuals. Sorry?
Because you have to share it, you have to share with those that don't have, whereas if you're bringing a personal korban for...
So you actually don't have the option of sharing it. This is one of the big questions always on the Haggadah. When we say in Halach Ma'anya, Kol Dichvan Yesev Yechol, anybody who's hungry, come and eat, Kol Ditzrich Yesev Yifsach, you actually can't invite them to your Korban Pesach that night. It's too late. Everyone has to be a member of a Korban by that morning. So why do we say it? So that's, several nice divrei Torah about halach ma'anya, but the basic answer is because halach ma'anya is post-Beis HaMikdash. They're not talking about inviting someone to your Korban Pesach. Also, you could invite people in advance, and it's just symbolic of what used to be done. You can imagine that when we bring a Korban Pesach, so there are signs up, I have room on my Korban or something like that, or looking for a Korban, that type of a situation. But the question of whether Korban Pesach is personal or is communal is, I think, really important, and it affects things that go way beyond the Korban Pesach. So I brought you here on the sheet several, frankly, long sources from number 2 to number 7, all out of our Parsha. because our parsha does something confusing when it presents the Korban Pesach. It gives us the laws all together of, number one, the Korban Pesach they're having in Mitzrayim. Number two, the Korban Pesach that they're going to have for all generations going forward. And number three, the laws of Pesach in general, having nothing to do with the Korban. Don't eat chametz, 7-day Yom Tov, and all of that for all generations. And it does it multiple times. Because sometimes it presents it as, this is what Hashem told Moshe, and sometimes it presents it as, this is what Moshe told the Jews. So you get this very elaborate presentation, which frankly, if you don't read it carefully, you can get confused about. So if you take a look just at the headings for numbers 2 through 7, I went through the parsha and tried to show what's happening at each point. So the first point is Hashem gives Moshe the rules for the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim. That's the reading that starts HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. It's read Parshas HaChodesh before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So Hashem tells Moshe about the Korban Pesach they're going to bring in Egypt. Then Hashem suddenly tells Moshe about the rest of the laws of Pesach, which will be observed for all generations, and which were not observed then. Meaning it wasn't a 7-day Pesach that year. They had a 1 day. That was it. Then, if you flip the page, you move from that into Moshe relating to the Jews the laws of the Korban Pesach they're about to bring. Then Moshe makes mention in number 5 about how the Korban Pesach is going to be brought in the future as well, without discussing any laws. Then Hashem tells Moshe the laws of the Korban Pesach that will be brought in the future for all generations. And then Moshe tells the Jews about how Pesach in general is going to be observed for all generations. So,
A lot of
detail.
yes, there's a lot going on there. So I'm not going to go through this line by line because we have like 50 minutes, 55 this week. But still, we'll get lost if we try that. But what I do want to do is show you how the language indicates either that it is personal or that it is communal. Take a look at the first paragraph, please, in source number 2. Specifically sentences 3 and 4. And I realized that I made this harder by keeping the pasuk numbers in the Hebrew and not in the English. That wasn't so bright. But if you take a look at the English here in number 2, look at the beginning. Moshe is told by Hashem to speak to everybody, right? Dabro kol adas Yisrael, speak to the whole community of Israel, and say, this translation is the JPS translation, that on the 10th of this month, right, the 10th of Nisan, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, what if you couldn't eat the whole thing? Let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby in proportion to the number of persons. Right? It contributes for the lamb according to what each household will eat. So that which we just read, the Hebrew on it is, I think, clearer than the English. Ish sela beis avos, sela bayis. Right? A lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. Is this speaking communally or personally? Personally, right? Totally personally. It's targeted to the individual's household, and it continues that way, right? Each person according to what that person would eat. Ish lafi ochlo. How did they word it in the translation? According to what each household will eat. On the other hand, if you go a couple of sentences later, you shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites, Kol Kehaladas Yisrael is the Hebrew, shall slaughter it at twilight. All the assembled congregation of the Israelites. That makes it communal.
Although I do think that it says, but if the household is too small for a lamb, let them share one with a neighbor. So that brings in a communal aspect.
Yeah.
Like less personal then. It's not just about you.
But if you ask me, I would look at it and say that highlights the personal character. Because if it was communal, then I would just say, so you're eating and let anybody come in. Like here, in advance, I have to go to my neighbor and say, will you join with me on this? So you're right, I'm inviting in others, but it's really just to become part of my household and identified as members on the Korban. Like you could do it, you could read this either way. You can make the argument either way. Jump to number 3, please, where we're talking not about Korban Pesach, but about Pesach for all generations, but we include within it, actually no, sorry, not number 3, that wasn't true, number 4. I am talking about Korban Pesach. Number 3 matters, but not yet. Number 4, Moshe is now relating the instructions to the nation. And he says to them something which, this is one of those cases where English doesn't do it because their verb forms are different from in Hebrew. In English it just says, go pick out lambs for your families. In Hebrew we distinguish between a verb that is singular and a verb that is plural. So when he gives the instruction of go pick out, I don't know if that's singular or plural. The Hebrew is mishchu ukechu, which is plural. He's speaking to them as a community. Mishchu ukechu lachem tzon lemishpechosechem, according to your families. V'shachatu, plural, hapasach, shech the Korban Pesach. Every verb there, and going into the next sentence, is in fact in the plural. He's speaking to them as a collective. On the other hand, it is going to stress yet again that you're doing this in your bayit, in your house. That you're doing it by mishpacha, you're doing it by family, which makes it personal. You can see both. And the same thing is true when Moshe moves from that generation's Korban to the one that they're going to bring across the generations after Egypt. It's not only about what's happening in Mitzrayim. Even though only in Mitzrayim is it done in the house. Meaning, after Mitzrayim, you do it at the site of the Beis HaMikdash. Right? Mishkan / Beis HaMikdash. You're not actually doing it at home.
Like people would come from all over.
So, usually what you would do, I think, well, what you did with normal korbanos was you brought your money and there were animal vendors there on site. You weren't showing up, having dragged the animal from home. There's too much risk in that. What if it gets a blemish? What if you don't need that? You go there with the money and you buy the animal there. Korban Pesach, odds are you've got vendors there. That's what I would expect.
I have a question. If they were slaves, where did they get all these lambs? Unblemished lambs?
Right.
Did they have livestock?
To which the answer is, where did you get your gold and your silver and everything else that you left Egypt with? You got it from the Mitzrayim. Right. That's why he has to say to them, in advance, go prepare this. Right? And that becomes a part of the mitzvah, as the preparation in advance. So, when you look at what's instructed for the generations, look at number 5. This is Moshe telling the Jews about how Korban Pesach is going to be done in the future. He doesn't speak really, he doesn't focus here on the laws of the Korban Pesach, but just that there is a Korban Pesach to be brought. But tell me what you see in number 5. Is this personal or communal?
It was the same thing as before. Shmeltem is the plural, and then Necha and Vanecha is the personal.
Right. So much of it is plural in terms of the verbs, and not just the verbs, the pronouns. Havadah hazos lachem va'amartem. Right. All of this is plural, and then on the other hand, again, we specify the house. Even though you're not bringing it in your house, but you're remembering how Hashem passed over Pesach the homes of the Jews. And then last in our survey, if you go to number 6, when you get the laws of the Korban Pesach for all generations. So right there in the middle, again we're told about not taking the meat outside of the house, min habayis, although it's not strictly speaking necessarily a house. But the language at the same time is very plural, very tzibur, very community. Kol adas Yisrael yasu oso. The entire nation of Israel, the community of Israel, as they put it here, shall do it. So the language can be read both ways. There's emphasis on the plural, but there are clear identifications of the individual. The laws of the Korban Pesach are also a blend, and some of this goes back to what you said here when I asked you the question about whether it's singular or plural. I gave you bullet points for this rather than go through all the sources, but for those who want to look it up afterwards, you can see I also told you in number 8 where you could find the various Gemaras that are the sources for the things in number 8. The ones in number 9 are basically straight out of the Psukim, except for the third one. So, the mixed messages. Number 1, you have a fascinating rule that emerges from the Gemara in Pesachim, which is the Korban Pesach is not supposed to be brought by an individual. Let's say a person is just living on his own.
Sorry,
single.
where are you?
In the bullet points in number 8.
Oh.
Let's say you have somebody who, single, and has a good appetite, and says, well, look, it's only a yearling lamb, there isn't that much meat on it, I'm going to eat it myself. Just wants to do it personally. So we are taught, there's a debate among the Tanoim, among the sages of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, and the conclusion of the discussion, as it's brought in the Rambam, is that you're not supposed to do it alone. You're supposed to have somebody else participate with you, although you're Yotze. If you did it alone, you did fulfill the mitzvah, and there's some discussion as to why the Rambam frames it that way. You shouldn't, but if you do, it's an odd formulation, but that's a little bit outside of the scope of what we're going to talk about here. But it's not done as an individual. Further, it's done, as I wrote here, en masse. The word the Gemara uses is bikinufia. This is what Goldie had said before, right? You're bringing it with everybody. It's this massive event. Further, as we've noted, you bring it even when people are tamei, which is usually associated with a communal korban, not a personal one. If an individual has to bring a chatas, but they're tamei, they have to wait. That's the way it goes. And further, you bring it even on Shabbos. Korban Pesach, if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, right, happens every once in a while, you still bring the Korban Pesach. The rule is only a communal korban with a set time should override Shabbos. Right? Otherwise, we just say, come back later. So,
You can bring up the Mishnah? I didn't understand that. I thought we could bring on Mishnah.
right. No, you're asking a different question. You're asking the Pesach Sheni question.
That's what I was about to say. Why is there Pesach Sheni?
Why is there Pesach Sheni? Good. So the answer is that if the majority of the community is Tamei, then they bring it on the first one, and everybody brings even when they're Tamei. If it's the minority of the community that's Tamei, then they just wait for Pesach Sheni. Yeah. So these halachos, these laws, seem to make it communal. But then you flip it and you say, but it's only in your house in Egypt. And you're doing it, as a family. It's only for the people who bought into the korban. And we don't share one big communal korban. Meaning, if this was really, somebody mentioned this before, if this was really a communal korban, then everybody would just pay in for one korban. And that's not the way it works. In fact, the Rambam has very interesting language in number 10. The Rambam, in his introduction to Masechah Zvachim, gives you a breakdown of the different types of korbanos, and he acknowledges there are korbanos that are hybrid, and this is one of them. He says the fourth kind of korban is korban yachid ke'ein korban zibur. It's a personal korban, but it's like a communal one. And his first example is the Korban Pesach. So, why? Why is this such a mess? Why couldn't it just be like so many other korbanos that are really straightforward? Either it's personal, or it's communal. Why are we doing this both ways? What would you say?
Maybe because of the reason why we bring the korban in the first place.
Okay.
Which is the blood on each doorpost. So that's the communal part, the personal part.
Okay.
But it was for all of the Israel.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, the original experience had both elements, but I'll just ask further then, why was that? In other words, why did the original experience have to have, on the one hand, personal ritual, like putting the blood on the doorpost, and at the same time, or not at the same time, but when really the experience was such a communal experience of getting out of Mitzrayim together? So I'm going to make it easy, because I bullet pointed it in number 11. I see three approaches. And what I mean by when I say three approaches is three approaches to why we bring the Korban Pesach at all. What are we trying to accomplish? And these will matter a great deal because they speak not only to why we brought the Korban Pesach in Egypt, or why we bring it when we have the ability to bring it, but it speaks to why we have a Seder. That's a piece of this as well. And I think you have 3 levels. One approach is that it is commemoration and gratitude. That's one idea. Meaning, I'm commemorating the fact that God took us out of Egypt. I'm displaying gratitude for it. Second idea is that the Korban Pesach actually is meant to educate us in service of Hashem. And then third is that the experience of the Korban Pesach, and yes, the Seder, is one of transformation and sanctification every year. We are actually supposed to be changed by it. And all 3 of these, as we'll see, involve the individual and also involve the community. So there's a lot to talk through. That's why I tried to present it in an orderly way. So, first of all, commemoration. If you go back to the language in number 3, there's a very clear emphasis on commemorating what happened and expressing gratitude for it. Right? You look at the opening sentence in number 3. Right? This is going to be a memorial for you. And not only that, it continues, you're going to make this a celebration for God. You're expressing gratitude. And that's not just the overall Pesach celebration, but it's the Korban. If you flip the page onto number 5, we're told, when your children ask you, right? When your children ask you, what do you mean by this, right? As they translate it, you shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, ... So you are going to teach them that we are commemorating what God did. And again, one more time, in source number 7. It also says, you shall explain to your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. Not only to your son, explain it to your daughter as well, but that's the translation they used. But you are remembering what Hashem did for me. Because it is a memorial, because it expresses gratitude, it makes sense for it to be both communal and private. Because we were saved as individuals. Right? This is a korban of gratitude because God saved us, each one of us individually. Right? A person is in a situation where they face some kind of hazard to their health. They make a Birkas HaGomel. Right? There's a bracha to say afterwards. They bring, if you have a Beis HaMikdash, you bring a Korban Toda, a thanks offering. Those are personal. I was in danger. I was enslaved. God took me out. It's personal. But we also came to see ourselves as a nation at that point. And so there is this community, this tzibur component. And so the Korban has both elements to it. And that's what you were saying, Goldie, before. It has both. The only weakness that I see in this explanation is that the gratitude and the commemoration come after. When we were in Egypt, you weren't commemorating anything, you were living it. Right? What's it like to be in the story that everybody in the future is going to be commemorating? You're not commemorating, you're living it. So I find that to be a little bit of a weakness. Not terrible, but it is a weakness in it. Second idea is that it's education of what our relationship with God is supposed to be like. The idea of education is also clear in the language. We've already seen it, right? When it said, you're going to tell your children, God did this for me. One case, it's your child's going to ask you. In other cases, you're just going to tell the child. That's how you get the Rabbanim at the Seder. But the emphasis on teaching your children is fairly clear. And again, that explains why you would have a hybrid identity to it. Because my relationship with Hashem is personal. But my relationship with Hashem is also communal. Both of them are there. What do I mean by that when I say that your relationship with Hashem is personal?
How do you express yourself? Daven to Hashem, think of what life and become close to Hashem. It's very personal.
Very true. You also bring personal traits to it. Right? If you take a look at number 12, I found this by accident. I was trying to find a source in the discussion about the Korban Pesach being communal versus being personal, and for some reason somebody had online the Darash David of Rabbi David Hofstetter on Korban Pesach. They aren't here, but you'll have to. Maybe I'll single that out in the email when I send out the email follow-up. But he actually expressed this really well in terms of the personal character of the relationship with Hashem, as expressed in the Korban Pesach. He talks about the fact that it's done in the home. And look at what he says. He says, "Why is it prohibited to remove the meat of the Korban Pesach from our homes? Perhaps this alludes to the proper way for us to observe all of the dimensions of the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. The proper observance of this mitzvah does not take place outdoors in a public setting. Rather, it should be observed in a private venue, inside one's home. A person's home, his private domain, is the place where he can follow his own individual path in Avodas Hashem. It is only in that context that every individual or group can carve out his own niche. The proper setting for expressions of our individuality is not the public square, where we must function as part of the conglomerate whole of the Jewish nation. Rather, it is within the privacy of our own homes." He says, where do we get to stand out and be unique and be different and not worry about whether it's going to attract somebody else's attention in a way that's not what we're looking for? In the house, where you're just your own domain. So he says that's what you're emphasizing is the traits of the individual, and I thought that actually reminded me a lot of a poem of Rav Kook in number 13. I brought you an excerpt from it. It's a longer poem. My translation is online somewhere. But Rav Kook talks about the importance of each individual bringing that which is unique to them to the act of ultimately leading to Geula, leading to redemption, but to their relationship with Hashem. So if you look at my translation there, he says, we will not measure every acquisition by our personal measure. Meaning, I'm not going to measure what everybody else is doing based on me. We will know that each individual is only a unit, one portion, a share of our community, and how could the whole judge but little? Each person towards his heart's desire will travel and succeed, and from the fruit of their hands their nation will be elevated. Each in his trade will breathe the breath of life. When he builds for himself a home, the ruin of our people will be rebuilt. Each one has to do it individually, and that will lead to the benefit for the nation as a whole. So you have this personal character to our relationship with Hashem, but you also have the communal character. I think I might have mentioned this once. There was a woman in my community in Allentown who was from a Reform background. And she once observed to me that watching davening in our shul reminded her of parallel play. Right? When you think about it. Did I mention that here? Okay. Well, think about it, right? When you have these kids who are really, really young, bless you, so they're all sitting there with their toys, doing their own thing. We call it a play date, right? We act as though they're playing together. But they're just playing privately in a shared space. So she said, that's what she sees when she comes to shul, right? Everyone is doing their own davening, and they happen to be in the same area.
But there's value in that, and
correct.
Those parallel play is important for kids, and parallel davening is important for adults, because even if you're acting as an individual and you're in your own space and you're davening privately, it's different than doing it in the privacy of your home and being a part of a community where you're observing other people doing the same thing.
Very much agreed.
I don't know if that was meant from this woman as a negative or positive or just an observation. But
she's a very sharp person. She meant what she meant. But
the form has a different method.
She was used to something that was much more communal. Much more read response, much more English readings and
But parallel and communal, together.
Right, even if you don't have a minyan, it's still better to daven together.
Yes.
It's what the Korban Pesach dynamic of both private and where you're going.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Take a look. I brought you this in number 14. This is fascinating. Rav Moshe Feinstein was addressing the question of the value of davening with a minyan. And he argued that we want you to daven with a minyan, even if it's a challenging thing to do so. And he says it's because the Gemara tells us that Hashem always accepts the tefillah of a community. That's a given. So he writes in number 14, even though the Talmud says the acceptance of communal prayer is because prayer is heard and accepted when it is communal, and so is found in the Rambam, it is logical that this should itself generate an obligation. The fact that God hears when people daven as a community, that in of itself makes davening with a community obligatory. For if a person's prayer could not be accepted, perhaps it would not constitute a prayer at all, and one would not fulfill his obligation to fulfill the mitzvah of prayer. He says, if a person davens in a way that they know God isn't going to accept, that's not davening.
Or if they're looked at through the lens of their merits alone, it's not accepted as with the...
Right, well, the reasons for why Hashem prefers the communal prayer is its own discussion, and I think it's a good discussion to have, and that's definitely a piece of it, standing on our own merit versus participating in the community. I think that's true. There's a lot to be said for why, when you pray with the community, it's considered to be better. It helps a person to focus. There's a lot to it. But what Ramosha is suggesting here is that since that's the form in which God is willing to accept our tefillah, then that's the way you have to do it. Which parenthetically may well, I'm not poskening anything, and this is a longer discussion, but it may well apply for women as well as for men.
I think women would probably focus on what they daven by themselves than if they were surrounded by their friends.
You think so?
Men also.
Just keep in mind that the recorder is running. There's one every week. But I think that's. I think that there is reason for the exemptions, but at the same time, I think that that what Ramosha is saying applies across the board. That it's better when it's done communally, and yes, hopefully meaningfully communally. So what we're seeing here, though, is if I look at the Korban Pesach not just as remember what happened back then and be grateful, but I look at it as an educational experience, this is your relationship with Hashem, then it should exist on a personal level and it should exist on a communal level, because it really is both. Your relationship with Hashem is personal and unique. It's the traits of your home, your family, yourself. Like what Rabbi Hofstadter was saying, like what Rav Kook was saying. At the same time, it's communal and it has to be done together. And then I take it to a third place, which is transformation and sanctification, which you find in the laws of the Korban Pesach. There's an element here of becoming somebody new when you bring the Korban Pesach. There is a new commitment to God, right? A lot is made about the idea that when you shecht the Korban Pesach in Egypt, you're shechting the Egyptian God. Saying that, I reject their idolatry, I reject their avodah zarah. We talked about it last year for Parshas Bo. I wanted to do last year's shir again because I really liked it. But that was the one where we talked about turning your home into a mizbeach, right? Yeah, it was a good one, no?
Yeah.
I like that one. So I brought you the medrash that we used in number 15. Sorry?
Just FYI.
Yes.
In case you have like a really, I'm always happy to have it again.
Okay.
One, right? Because you forget stuff.
Okay. Thanks. That's good to know.
That was an excellent one, actually. I really like that one.
Thank you. So take a look at number 15. Where we're told to put the blood on the doorpost and the lintel of the home. So the Medrash says, I might have thought reversing the order, putting the lintel first, might disqualify the mitzvah. No, it doesn't. The Torah also says you shall put the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, so putting one before the other is still effective. We see, the rest of this Medrash is really the key part, we see that our ancestors had 3 altars in Egypt, the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And Rabbi Yishmael said there are actually 4, but it calls the home a mizbeach. It calls it an altar. So this is about a ritual in which we are bringing a korban and we are actually transforming the home into a mikdash. And from this, we start to understand some of the laws of the Pesach. So take a look back at number 6. The opening pasuk in number 6 says, Kol ben nechar lo yochal bo. And they translate that reasonably as no foreigner shall eat of it. However, the Chachamim understood that it didn't refer to a foreigner, because we're already told all Jews have to bring it. What it refers to is a Jew who has estranged himself from God. The Korban Pesach is not open to everybody. If somebody has said, I am now leaving Judaism and embracing some other religion, they're not eligible for the Korban Pesach. Why? Because it's not just a ritual, and it's not just a historical commemoration. It's not even just educational. It's transformative. It's supposed to change us in terms of our commitment to Hashem. You can't bring somebody in to do it if that person has dropped the whole thing. Now, I realize that's a sensitive question today, because there are people who have in their families people who have indeed dropped it. And what are you now saying? Are they not welcome at our Seder? So first of all, your Seder doesn't have the halachic status of a Korban Pesach, and that's very important to remember. The rule that this mumar, this person who has rebelled against God, is not eligible to eat from the Korban Pesach, doesn't mean that that person can't be at your Seder table. But number two, it takes work to qualify as a mumar. It doesn't just mean this is a person who says, I'm not practicing mitzvahs anymore or whatever. This means somebody who has rejected God. And that's not such a simple thing to define. Also, though, we are told that in order to be eligible for the Korban Pesach, if you take a look, still in number 6, the next to last pasuk, Kol arel lo yochal bo. If he's lacking a bris milah, he's not eligible to participate in the Korban Pesach. Interesting piece of information here. The Torah has a punishment called karet, the literally divine excommunication. It applies it in 38 cases. There are 38 different transgressions, if you will, which could lead to karet. 36 of them are prohibitions. So some of the rules regarding forbidden relationships have a punishment of karet. However, there are 2 mitzvos aseh, 2 commandments for which failure to fulfill them earns karet. What are the 2?
Eating
Failure to eat the Korban Pesach and bris milah, failure to fulfill bris milah. Those are the 2 that bring about a punishment of kares. They're linked to each other, bris milah and Korban Pesach, because these are the declarations of transformation. Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig has an essay in which he says that Korban Pesach is for the community what bris milah is for the individual. I brought you also a medrash here which supports this idea in number 16. A pasuk from Yechezkel that we quote in the Haggadah. V'omar lach b'demayech chayi, v'omar lach b'demayech chayi. Hashem describes finding the Jews in Egypt in their slavery. And I told you, by your blood shall you live, by your blood shall you live. Medrash says that's the blood of the Korban Pesach and the blood of the bris milah. The 2 of them are linked together. By the way, in all of this, I'm not forgetting the difficulties that people have with karbanos on the whole. That's understood. It's just not the topic for right now. But these are all, or mostly, on the private level of transformation.
At what point did karet come in for bris? It's like if you don't do it on the 8th day?
So that's a really good question. There's a lot of discussion in the Minchas Chinuch commenting on the Sefer Chinuch about exactly that question. What happens if somebody, Rahman al-Islam, dies as a minor? So do they get karet? The answer is no. Is this somehow on the parent if they didn't do it for the child? Also no. What if a person has it done and they're already an adult? No karet. There's a whole discussion about this.
So it really only applies once
the
you
adult
die.
passes away without it. More or less.
So it's not something that was ever.
Karet is not carried out by people. Karet is carried out by God. For the most part, there may be some applications to communal treatment of somebody who is under karet, but basically not. So most of this is Well, first of all, what we've said is that this is commitment to God and transformation of one's commitment to God as an individual / as a community. The communal piece emerges very clearly in source number 17. The Sefer HaChinuch talks about the fact that you're not allowed to give the Korban Pesach to the Mumar, the person who has rejected God. You're not allowed to give it to the Arel, the person who's uncircumcised. Meaning, we're not framing this as, if someone doesn't have a bris, he's not allowed to eat. We're framing it as, if they don't have a bris, we're not allowed to give it to them.
Now they have double curry.
No, it's not about kares. There's no kares on that, on giving it to them.
No, but they have to...
Because they didn't get to do the Korban Pesach.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of like a double whammy.
Right, I guess so. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it, but yeah.
Also, they're not going to want it. If they rejected Hashem, they're not going to want the Korban Pesach.
That's not always true.
Its own person. But I guess it doesn't matter to get double curry because curry only counts once.
No, but what Hannah says is not always true, right? Meaning you have people who have rejected everything from the religion, but they want to be part of the family.
But they're not going to say, I want to do the mitzvah of Korban Pesach.
Right. No, they're just going to say, pass me some lamb.
Or give me some food.
Yeah.
For
For the food, for the participation, for the sense of not having been excluded.
Is there any practical implication of this nowadays?
No. I mean, who knows when Korban Pesach comes back? But this is going to be
thinking about that. This is it's a mandatory meat eating.
Women.
Yes.
Is this the only mandatory meat eating?
I believe so. There's some discussion around Shabbos and Yom Tov and eating meat from a Korban Shlamim, but it's not that it's a suggestion, but that the others are more easily understood as being applicable only to somebody who actually likes eating meat. There's more to be said about those, but the Mish of Simcha on a Yom Tov, but yeah, this one is a problem for vegetarians. But in terms of the communal aspect, where we are told, don't give to this person, as well as they also don't give to a ger toshav back in the psukim. Rabbi Rosenzweig points out, if you take a look at number 18, remember that when the Jews are in the wilderness already and they bring the Korban Pesach, there are people who are tamei. They're not able to bring it, and they complain, and that gives us the parsha of Pesach Sheni. But look at their complaint. They say, why should we be reduced not bringing the Korban of God at its time, B'soch B'nei Yisrael, among the children of Israel? There's that desire to be part of the community. So there's this transformation that's going on with the Korban Pesach. It is a transformation in terms of our relationship with God. It is a transformation in terms of our relationship with each other. I saw a fascinating idea, number 19, based on something from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who I'm going to come back to. But he talks about why we say Tumah Hutra B'tzibur. Why is it that a communal korban can be brought when people are tamei, whereas a private korban cannot? And he offers this suggestion here in number 19. This writer is Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Waldberg, but he's building on an idea from the Rebbe. He says the inner explanation for why Tumah is accepted for the community is that the sanctity of the nation of Israel, meaning community, is higher than matters of Tumah and Tahara. Community is of a greater value than Tumah and Tahara, and that's why Tumah Hutra B'tzibur. That's why the community can bring a korban even if they are tamei. This is an idea you can do a lot with. There's a lot more to say. But this explains the hybrid identity of the Korban Pesach. We start out as individuals. The process is supposed to convert us into being tzibur, into being community. And this happens every year, because we're perpetually transforming ourselves. And we have to do it every Pesach, because each year you bring new people along or you bring new commitment, so that it's a transformative experience year in, year out. And I think that all three of these aspects should be at our Seder. Meaning to look at this in terms of the individual and community as as, to go back to the first idea, gratitude for the way that Hashem saved us as individuals and made us into a nation. Education, that we serve Hashem with the qualities of individuals, each one with their own talents. We're doing it collectively, but each one using that which they have as individuals. And as transformation, consciously turning ourselves from individuals and the individual bayit, the individual home and family, into a tzibur, into a community. Clear? I have one more source, but I want to make sure that we do the review questions. The last source is a great source. I love this. But first, I just want to make sure that we know what we did, because there was a lot of stuff here. We talked about the laws of the Korban Pesach that indicate that it is, in fact, for the tzibur, that it is, in fact, for the community, right? The fact that you bring it as more than one person, the fact that it's brought in mass, the fact that you bring it even if there's tumah, the fact that you bring it even if it's Shabbos. We have the laws of the Korban Pesach that indicate that it's personal, right? It's in the home, only by the members of the Korban, that tumah is pushed off, but not fully permitted. We had 3 reasons to bring the Korban Pesach, right? Commemoration and gratitude, education, transformation and sanctification, right? This is all relatively... Okay. The emphasis on communal davening of Rav Moshe, right, fits the lesson of the Korban Pesach. We are accepted when we serve God as a community, and that's why we're supposed to try to do it communally. The elements of the Korban Pesach that demonstrate commitment to God as part of our transformation: slaughtering the Egyptian god, sanctifying the home as a mizbeach, excluding the mumar, the person who has rejected everything, excluding the harel, the uncircumcised one. And then on the other hand, there are elements that demonstrate the growth of community. We don't give it to the mumar and the harel. We don't, it's besoch b'nei Yisrael, among the children of Israel. The idea that community overrides tumah, community is a higher value than tumah. So you see these 2 transformations going on. I want to make sure I say this clearly, because I have a feeling I didn't before. The transformation of individual to become community, and transformation of slave of Egypt to servant of God. Those are the 2 transformations that are going on. So I come to this last source, which I would not call it pshat, but it's such a beautiful idea. Right, Menachem Mendel Schneerson happened to come across this while I was looking for that same source that I was looking for before, that I mentioned. I was looking for a source regarding the Korban Tzibur and Korban Yachid, the private and communal Korbanos. So look what he says here. In the Korban Pesach itself, there is yet another point which indicates the interconnection of the individual with the tzibur, with the community. In that the Korban Pesach had to be prepared whole, with its head, its legs, and its innards. The difference and distance between the head and legs, etc., is obvious. Yet it was required that all components be prepared together and in like manner. The whole thing is prepared together. The symbolic inference from it is that although a tzibur consists of different individuals of widely ranging levels, from that of head to that of foot, they nevertheless join together to constitute a tzibur and contribute each his full share to the tzibur. That's part 1. But then part 2. How is unity between one individual and another, and between an individual and the collective, achieved? This too is indicated in the name Pesach, one meaning of which is to pass over, more precisely to leap over, indicating, among other things, leaping over partitions separating Jew from Jew and individual from community, until all are united and merged into the single organic entity that constitutes the Jewish nation. You follow? He says, we're all bringing the Korban in our own homes, but Hashem passes over the homes and over all of the dividers and barriers between those homes. And we are called upon to do that as well, to be posayach, to pass over those divisions. In practical terms, this means that every Jew has been given the capacity and is expected to rise above his narrow personal interests for the sake of the overriding interests of the community in which he lives and of Klal Yisrael. On their part, the Tzibur and Klal Yisrael intervene in behalf of each individual so that not a single Jew shall be lost, God forbid, helping each and all to free themselves from their Lemitzrayim in whatever form it may be. And the Geulah of the Klal, of the community, is contingent upon the Geulah of the individual as an individual. And then he goes on to say, of course, our sages declare the Geula from the present Galus, the present exile will be in the manner of the Geula from Egypt. So there's a need for everyone within the community to look out for the other and to pass over the divisions the partitions that separate one from the other as part of this Geula of the Tzibur, this Korban Tzibur, this communal Korban. I thought that was a really nice image. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.